The vote for Brexit was a great shock to me, and I imagine to most people in this room. Last Friday morning, the disintegration of the European Union seemed practically inevitable. But as the initial disbelief wore off, something unexpected happened, and the tragedy no longer looks like a fait accompli. Over the past week, buyer's remorse has set in as the hypothetical became real. Sterling plunged, Scotland threatened to break away, and some of the working people who supported the Leave campaign have started to realize the bleak future that both the country and they personally face. Even the champions of Leave are retracting their pre-referendum claims about Brexit. In a spontaneous response, over 4 million people petitioned Parliament to hold a second referendum. By the time the parliamentary debate on this petition takes place, it's not inconceivable that more people will have signed the petition than voted for Brexit. Just as Brexit was a negative surprise, the spontaneous response is a positive one. People on both sides of the referendum, and most importantly, those who didn't even vote, particularly young people under 35, have become mobilized. This is the kind of grassroots involvement that the European Union has never been able to generate. The referendum has highlighted for people in Britain just what they stand to lose by leaving the European Union. If this sentiment spreads to the rest of Europe, what seemed like the inevitable disintegration of the European Union could instead create positive momentum for a stronger and better Europe. The process could start in Britain. The popular vote can't be reversed, but a signature collecting campaign could transform the political landscape by revealing a newfound enthusiasm for the European Union. This approach could then be replicated in the rest of the European Union, creating a movement to save the EU by profoundly restructuring it. I am convinced that as the consequences of Brexit unfold in the months ahead, more and more people will be eager to join this movement. What the EU should not do is penalize British voters while ignoring their legitimate concerns about the deficiencies of the European Union. Europe's leaders should recognize their own mistakes and acknowledge the democratic deficit in the current institutional arrangements. Rather than seeing Brexit as the negotiation of a divorce, they should seize it as an opportunity to fundamentally reinvent the European Union so that the UK and others at risk of exit would want to join. Will disaffected voters in France, Germany, Sweden, Italy, Poland, and everywhere else see the European Union benefiting their lives? If the answer is yes, the EU will emerge stronger. If the answer is no, it will eventually blow apart. Unfortunately, Brexit has not only created an opening to reinvent the EU, it has also aggravated two looming dangers. First, it unleashed a crisis in the financial markets, comparable in severity only to 2007-8. This has been unfolding in slow motion, but Brexit is accelerating it. It's likely to reinforce the deflationary trends that were already prevalent. The Eurozone has been lagging in the global recovery because of restrictive fiscal policies. Now it has to contend with an impending slowdown. The orthodoxy of German policymakers stands in the way of the only effective response, having a Eurozone budget that could adopt counter-cyclical policies. Meanwhile, the banking system of continental Europe has not recovered from the earlier crisis. It will now be severely tested. We know what needs to be done. Unfortunately, political and ideological disagreements within the Eurozone have stood in the way of using the ESM as a backstop for banks as well as sovereigns. Second, the EU faces growing military threats. Our external enemies have been emboldened, posing new, as yet unfathomable dangers in various parts of the wider region that are also liable to aggravate the refugee crisis. It's against this background that I propose to discuss the refugee crisis with special emphasis on the financial needs it presents. I won't address the human rights and development issues for lack of time, but I discussed them in the written remarks submitted to the various committees. The European response to the refugee crisis was riddled with flaws even before the present turn of events. Chancellor Merkel showed great moral leadership when she opened Germany's doors wide to refugees. Unfortunately, her initiative was not well thought through. It ignored the pull factor. When the sudden influx of migrants overwhelmed the capacity of the authorities, public opinion turned against her. That's when she struck her ill-fated deal with Erdogan. I've identified the flaws of that deal in detail. First, it was not truly European. It was imposed on Europe by Chancellor Merkel. Second, it was severely underfunded. Third, it was not voluntary. It imposed quotas that many member states opposed and required refugees to take up residence in countries where they were not welcome, while forcing others who reached Europe by irregular means to be returned to Turkey. Finally, it transformed Greece into a de facto holding pen with inadequate facilities. Since then, the situation has only deteriorated. Member states have become increasingly unwilling to cooperate with one another and are pursuing discordant policies. With migrant flows, while migrant flows to Greece have eased, they have surged in the central Mediterranean. In these circumstances, a comprehensive and coherent European asylum policy is not possible. The trust needed for cooperation is lacking. It will have to be rebuilt through a long and laborious process.